like to invite another friend of mine, David Zhou, onto the stage. David?
Oh man, this is exciting. Because usually I'm in your seat. And the last time we had this public conversation, I was in your seat, you were in my seat.
Yeah, and so the roles are reversed. So this is going to be uncomfortable for David now. We call him DZ, so Dizzy is comfortable asking questions, and today he's going to be answering questions.
I might flip the script on you.
Yeah, and I think this will be sort of a little bit of a challenge for me, trying to keep you on that side. So, how did we meet? Do you want to tell the audience, or shall I?
You can fill in the gaps here. We met virtually, where I was a part of a community called On Deck, which was really bringing oh, there we go. We have folks who know what On Deck is. We were building a community of founders, investors, operators across the board, but we were really building for like really niche verticals and spaces. And we met through that. And when you first, actually it was funny enough, I don't remember if you remember this, when we first started chatting and I was pitching you the idea of this community, you're like, do I need another community, especially if it's an online community? Because as we talked about earlier, Asher's a big fan of in-person things. But eventually I was able to convince you in.
Yeah, well, when we met, I also felt like you were a misfit at On Deck, as much as On Deck was a misfit of a collection of misfits.
We were definitely a collection of misfits.
So I guess the question for me, just to take me back a little bit, why did you join, out of all the opportunities that you could, so you're a third culture kid, but you're born and raised in California, so you're not as cool as most of us here.
I am definitely not. I'm definitely not. Born and raised here, went to school here, still here. I now live 15 minutes away from my parents. So I haven't gone very far. So no, what was this, 12 schools, a billion different countries. No, none of that.
So why On Deck?
There was a challenge that I had in my mind, which this was at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'd built a number of in-person gatherings, which my friends colloquially called social experiments, that I really enjoyed doing. And when the pandemic hit, it threw all that out the door. And so the challenge was, can we build strong relationships, strength of strong ties, in a virtual setting? And On Deck effectively had this challenge, and they were still figuring it out. So that's why it was particularly interesting to me, and we went down that rabbit hole.
And then you sort of eventually moved on from On Deck, and then you were at the Alchemist Accelerator, which is another sort of global community. But I guess the thing that I would like to talk about is what you're doing today, and maybe get to the topic that we're talking about. So you
got to remind myself what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, is that yeah? So the question here is this: what the fuck were you thinking to quit?
Do you have any children in the audience?
Yeah, hopefully not. So you quit working, and you are now dedicating your life to Superclusters, Kappa Joe, and this community that you're building, which I think you're not telling anybody about. So what are you doing exactly? What are you working on, and why?
This is where I'm going to go out and announce what I'm working on. I didn't know that was where we were going here. A couple of things, unscripted. One of the lessons, actually, one of the folks part of your 42 Geeks who once told me, Mark Suster, who's a phenomenal investor, once told me is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which I believe is a line that he got from Zig Ziglar. And that has always been revolving in my head. And as On Deck scaled over time, by the time I'd left, I was in charge of running the investor community, but by the time I'd left, we had effectively 2,000 investors, angel investors, fund managers, LPs, which Asher over here is as well, in our community. And there were certain things where I felt like relationships don't scale. Whether you believe in the Dunbar number or not, there are only so many folks we can keep in our orbit at any given point in time. And so the reason, going to like how much Asher knows about my life, was how do we keep things intimate, but also build relationships in a way that no other group of individuals are building relationships. And so a couple ways we thought about doing so were at any given point in time, especially as motivations change, and this is actually a paper by George Lowenstein back in 1994, not to get too nerdy, but like there are 5 triggers to curiosity. And like, questions and riddles, violated expectations, answers to, access to information that other people don't know about, nostalgia, and all these kind of things effectively is how do we formulate and construct something that is interesting for our group of audience that triggers at least 2 triggers of these curiosity things at any given point in time. And I don't think that scales in the version where it goes to thousands and thousands of people, which is why, for the most part, given that we're keeping things intimate, most of the things I've done, in fact, almost everything I've done outside of the couple things that are on my LinkedIn are in private.
So thank you for sharing. So I guess getting to the, intimate, which is why you kind of feel like in order to maintain intimacy and belonging, strong belonging, communities can't really scale and keep that going.
So I think it goes back to like Dunbar's number, which is at the end of the day, like 150 people, you really build those relationships over time, and roughly, like, to be fair, given at any point in chapter, any point in motivation, that does shift, right? The same people that you're really close to back in high school were not the same people you were close to in college, which were not the same people as you had different inflection points in your life. And so part of this, a lot of the community aspect is what does a community look like that grows with you? That doesn't just satisfy one inflection point in your life, but satisfies multiple inflection points. And that was always the thesis behind On Deck as well, because we had a number of people who joined us as angel investors. These are folks who are founders, operators, executives who are beginning to invest in companies for the first time, and they were trying to learn how to be investors. And over time, even though the group I was involved in was On Deck Angels, these investors ended up running their own syndicates, ended up becoming fund managers, running their own funds, and eventually, also investing in other funds. And so how do we effectively track that motivation over time, but also knowing how do we branch off enough where different people have different motives. Some people want to stay angel investors forever. Other folks who have been part of our community included Harry Stebbings at 20VC to Sheil Minot at Better Tomorrow, who you know very well, that we had to grow with them, and that required a very headcount or intention-based thing where we had to do so. And the flip side of community that we learned very, very quickly is that, going back to people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, is we needed to create a diaspora of connections and relationships between different people at a very intimate level very, very quickly. And one way we thought about doing so was creating a gratitude channel. And so for any time you received something from someone else, whether it's a cup of coffee or an introduction or a book that someone might give you if you go spend time with this person, you had to publicly thank that individual. And so everyone felt like they were part of something bigger and that everyone was more about giving rather than taking. And that is something that we had to build a lot of intentionality over time, but also keep the audience size small. And one of the other things that we're thinking about now in terms of communities is for every individual that joins the community in which I'm building now, they have to have effectively a token from 2 other folks in the community. 2 things that solves for. One, by the time you join, you know at least 2 other folks in the community before you join. So it can't be just, I only know one person, that's your only linchpin to kind of this community. And so from day one, you feel like you know enough other folks, but also don't know enough other folks that eventually help you with the activation energy to connect with other folks. So when you go to an event, and Asher and I do this quite often, where before we go to an event, we're like, are you going? And if Asher's going, I'm more likely to go. If Asher's going and another friend's going, I'm even more likely to go. And so that was the intentionality between that. The flip side of this is, given that we wanted to keep things really intimate, everyone has their own quality bar of who should be a part of this community, and that allows for people to, and they have a limited number of tokens each person can give, that there's only a finite number of folks that they can vouch for and bring into the community.
Now, you've built a very interesting sort of community which doesn't fall under, it's like an umbrella of multiple micro communities, because we were talking about emerging managers, we're talking about emerging LPs. Now, what is interesting, some of them are offline and some of them are virtual. There's something that's interesting that you've done, and maybe you can give the audience a couple of examples. So, for example, I've always found everything that you do is slightly different to, so...
hopefully in a good way.
Like, for example, some of the swag that some people get, like, can you tell us a little bit about that and what you were doing there?
So to us, the small details really matter.
Emphasis on the small details matter. Please, go ahead.
So there's a story that I heard from Simon Sinek a while back that I really liked. And the story was about the Undersecretary of Defense who came to speak at a conference and was holding a styrofoam cup in his hand. And he said, like, well, last year I came to this conference, and when I came to this conference, they booked me on a business class ticket. When I arrived at the airport, there was a black cab that that picked me up and sent me to my hotel. My hotel was pre-checked in, and then the next day, there was a black cab that picked me up at the hotel that brought me to the venue. And when we got to the venue, we got through the back door, and someone came in, was holding a ceramic mug of coffee for me. And then this year, I come and I'm no longer the Undersecretary of Defense, and so I booked my own tickets on Coach. I called my own taxi to go from the airport to the hotel. I booked my own hotel. I called another taxi from the hotel to the venue. And when I got to the venue, I found my own way backstage. And by the time I found my own way backstage, I was like, can I get a cup of coffee? And there was someone who pointed to the corner of the room and said, there's the coffee machine, go get your own cup of coffee. And that was a styrofoam cup in which he had. And there's the lesson here that he had shared was effectively with, people give us things because of the positions in which we have, and never overestimate the advantages and the perks that you have given the position in which you have. And he says everyone deserves a styrofoam cup, everyone deserves to be treated equal. And yeah, that was a great lesson there. But the second lesson I took from there was like, what if we gave everyone a ceramic mug? Like everyone the whole experience was designed to feel special. And so go into some of the examples in which we've done, we had a lot of staff per event. And so for every number of individuals that came, divide that number by 5, and that's the number of staff members in which we'd have at the event. So if we had 50 people, we'd have 10 staff members. And every single staff member was in charge of learning the dossier of every single person who was coming and treating them with the utmost respect from the point they checked in to the point they left. And other things we also think about in terms of events is the idea between like surprise versus suspense. Suspense is what brings people to the event, knowing that certain individuals like Asher, like Kevin, are going to be speaking. And then surprise is what people talk about after the event. That's what decides the NPS score after the event. And so at every event in which we designed certain things to be surprise. So for example, there's this amazing water bottle company out there, which they sell effectively aluminum water bottles. It's called Path Water, by the way, not sponsored. But one of the things they do is for these $10 aluminum water bottles, you can customize the labels on the water bottles. And at one point, we were doing some things for founders. We thought, how cool would it be for every single company that came, they got their own aluminum water bottle. And so the logo for the water bottle included the logo for the company, and usually where the little highlight says no added sugars, no preservatives, we added their key highlight for the company, for example, 30% month-over-month growth, and all these other things. And on the nutrition label, we'd include everything, the facts about the company. And so every time someone got a water bottle about someone else at the event, they felt like they were special and they had to be there, and this event was designed for them. The thing that Asher's alluding to is I have a podcast on the side. And in the podcast, I felt like it was extremely important for my early believers in season 1 to get a very special gift. And the one thing that you can control for experiences is there's this rule, you can find it on Wikipedia, called the peak end rule, which is of an experience, people remember the most about the peak of the experience, and people remember the most about the end of an experience. I can't really control peak because people take away with what they want, but we can include these surprises that hopefully increases the surface area for luck to stick for them to enjoy it. The end of the experience we can always control, which is giving them a gift at the very end. And so what we did is, I don't know if you guys, how many of you are familiar with the idea of like Lego brickheads? We have a couple. So what these effectively are is you use these Lego pieces to build what kind of like a bobblehead looking thing. Big head, small body. And so we'd customized a Lego brickheads for every single individual who had been on the podcast. And also came with a plaque along with that Lego brickhead of my favorite quote that they said during the podcast. And every single person got one of themselves with that quote. But that's another example of small details.
What was cool about that is that they don't get the model, they get a little bag with the pieces that they put together.
Yeah.
That's a whole experience. And that's just one example of the many things that you do, which kind of...
Fiverr works wonders.
So I guess the point there is it is the experience, right? And that memorable experience that creates sort of like even if, say, somebody in the UK or in Israel or wherever you have interviewed people in Europe, those people still remember you because of whatever it might be. Whether it was that
shipping internationally was a hassle, but still got it done.
Yeah, it's growing, but that's kind of like interesting, and it's not the same thing. It's not static as well. You're constantly coming up with new ideas to make it interesting, which I guess is kind of like when I walked in here and I got my passport. I thought that was cool, and that reminded me of Dizzy, because that's the kind of stuff you would do.
I enjoy. So I walked in and I got the same passport thing. They had this little like printer, which I was like super interesting. I was like, how much does it cost? And I'm like, it's $80. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to reveal how much that cost. But all that to say, I thought it was really special that they were customizing gifts that you can take home at the event for every individual that chose to do so.
Memorable experience. Any last takeaways, Dizzy?
I think going full circle here, at least in the topic of communities, is back to that Zig Ziglar line, which is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this goes back to your talk as well, where the goal of joining one or creating community is not so that there's a transaction that can be made. If over time great things happen, transactions will be made. But go in with the intention of how do I help others, but also how do I care for other people? And that requires a lot of listening, active listening. That as you hear these things, and this is something that I find, we can talk about all these other like Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve and all that, but a lot of this is, do you remember people even outside the transaction, and do you keep them top of mind? And if the people feel like you care, those relationships will go a long way, no matter what geography they're a part of.
And with that, I just want to highlight that I did get you to talk, and I think I did a good job.
Asher did a great job.
Moderating.
I'm going to be replaced.
Thank you, Dizzy.
Thank you.